What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero, back with another treasure format video. And in this video, we're going to be discussing a deck that, I'm not a personal fan of, but is a deck that you can play in the format, and that's Hand Control. But before we dive into why I'm not the biggest fan of this deck, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do consider subscribing. We're at around 407 subscribers at the time of recording, which is really awesome to me given that we just reached 400 at the start of February, and I'd really like to reach 500 by the end of the month. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you enjoy my videos, please help us reach that goal. In addition, if you want to play any of these formats that I covered in these videos for yourself, then we do have a Discord server. Link will be in the description down below, but it's a great place to find duels in these very underexplored formats. And lastly, if you enjoyed the video, as always, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot. But with all that out of the way, let's dive into Hand Control. So, Hand Control was a deck that was around in Critter format that was okay. It wasn't as good as the other control deck in Critter that was getting advantage, which was Mass Control. But it could potentially give your opponent a tough time, especially given that Exodia was a very powerful deck in that format. In this format, however, it's kind of fallen off a little bit. Every deck now has access to the 3 handrip cards, Confiscation, Delinquent Duo, and Forceful Sentry, which makes the deck shtick, not really as unique, and it makes it a lot less necessary, right? You can just run a good stuff deck that does play a fair amount of discard because you can just play those 3 hand rep spells. But I wouldn't necessarily call that hand control because every deck is playing these 3 spells. So Hand Control distinguishes itself by going a step further. Instead of just playing these 3 hand rip spells, it's also playing Robin Goblin and White Magical Hat, which can rip additional cards out of your opponent's hand. However, these cards do take some additional setup to actually pull off well, so we have to gear the deck towards that a little bit. And they do have some glaring weaknesses that you may see later on in some of the games. But before we dive into those, let's briefly talk about the other cards in the deck and how they sort of facilitate the main combos. So, we of course are playing 2 Witch of the Black Forest, 2 Sandgan. This can search out pretty much any card in our deck, which can be very useful. If your opponent's on an empty board state, or they will be next turn, you can search out a White Magical Hat, which can be very nice. Or you could just search out another Recruiter and just keep getting that card value back. We also have 3 Mystic Tomato, which can fetch out a Sandgan or a Witch, which can be very useful and very powerful. Mystic Tomato can also fetch out Cannon Soldier, which can be very great at the end of the game just to close out game states where your opponent might have walled up, but they might be at low life points. Bring out Cannon Soldier, tribute off your entire field, and that can be the end of the game. Mystic Tomato also has an additional target in this deck that isn't really played elsewhere, and that's Wall of Illusion. Now, Wall of Illusion pairs somewhat well with Robin Goblin, as if you set Wall of Illusion, your opponent attacks into it with a monster with less attack, and then that monster bounces back to hand. They'll take damage and have to discard a card, which is quite nice. Unfortunately, given that the top beater in this format is Mechanical Chaser, which has the same amount of attack as Wall of Illusion's defense, this combo is a lot less good here, but you can occasionally pull it off if they attack into it with like a Recruiter. In addition, being able to bring this out off of Mystic Tomato is pretty nice. You've got an instant wall that's very easy to access, so that is why we're playing it. We're also playing some cards that Mystic Tomato can't fetch out. We're playing 2 Mechanical Chaser of our own, as it is the premier beater in the format. We got only 2 in here because of space constraints. I think maybe you could potentially swap something else out for a 3rd one, but I didn't really feel like going to 41 cards, as we are already playing some very powerful bricks like Robin Goblin. So, I'd prefer just to keep it at 40 to make our chances of drawing Robin as high as possible. But you could definitely go up to 41 if you want to. I don't think it would impact the deck too much. We're also playing 3 Magician of Faith, which is very good at recycling back our powerful spells, like the 3 hand rips, which can let us go more aggressive on the discard front, but it can also just let us get things like Raigeki or Pot of Greed or any of our Power 5 limited spells. And lastly, we have 1 White Magical Hat as our way to get in damage and discard cards from hand. We're only playing 1 of this as, it is a bit of a fragile card, and it is very easily searchable off of Sandgan or Witch. I've seen other decks play things like Shining Angel to bring out White Magical Hat more easily, but I feel like that just exposes the White Magical Hat to even more removal, and so it isn't quite as good as I'd like it to be. In addition, if you don't have an easy way to clear whatever your opponent's got on the next turn, then the White Magical Hat is basically a body just to chump block, and that's not really that good. So I'm not really playing the Shining Angel package here, although you definitely could. Moving on to the spells, we of course have the Power 5 limited spells that I mentioned earlier, Change of Heart, Monster Reborn, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, and Darkhole. We also have the 3 hand rips, Confiscation, Duo, and Sentry, which are all pretty good and can be great targets off of Magician of Faith. We also have an additional limited spell in Snatch Steal, which can be very good at getting the aggressive on, taking one of your opponent's face-up monsters and getting in for a ton of damage, which can then convert to a lot of discards off of a Robin Goblin. We also have 3 Fisher to activate even more removal, and 3 Mystical Space Typhoon, other spell and trap removal as choice. Heavy Storm plays a bit badly with Robin Goblin in this deck, so Mystical Space Typhoon is a bit of a better option that doesn't harm ourselves as well. And lastly, for the traps, we have 3 Magic Jammer, as we really do want to keep our Robin Goblins online, and Magic Jammer can be a great way to do that. We have 1 Mirror Force, which is a great card if you manage to pull it off. The 2 Robin Goblins, as I mentioned, you don't want to go up to 3, as that's a bit too bricky, but also if you have only 1, then you're never going to draw it, so that's why we have 2 here instead. And lastly, we have 3 Trap Hole as a way to have even more removal, to clear our opponent's monsters and get in for more damage off of Robin. For the side deck, we have a couple different options. We have 3 Jiraigumo if we want to get a bit more aggressive, 3 Mana in Your Bug if we want more removal, a Wall of Illusion and 2 Swords if we want to go a bit more defensive, 2 Heavy Storm to bring in if we need to clear our opponent's back row in something like a Stall Mill or a Stall Burn deck, and 1 Mask of Darkness and 3 Solemn Judgment. If we're going up against a deck that has a bit more counter traps, these can be good to bring in those cases. But with the deck breakdown out of the way, let's dive into the games and see if this deck really is as bad as I'm making it out to be. Okay, we've got a game against Colgate, who is a very active duelist in this format, very active duelist on the Discord. Always a pleasure to have them on. They always play super cool decks, so I'm excited to see what they brought to the table this time. We are going to throw rock. Unfortunately, they throw paper, so we will be going second here. And let's see what we get in the opener. That's quite unfortunate. We draw a duo early on. Would have been great to go first, but unfortunately we did not. They're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser, set 1, pass back to us. I mean, we might as well fire the duo now, so we're just going to do it. Hopefully we can still get something good off them in their hand. We discard Change of Heart, which is incredibly good, so that's very nice. We're just going to set a Mystic Tomato, set a Magic Jammer, and set a Trap Hole, pass back to them. We have the read that they don't have Duo in the opener, as they would have used it first turn. So if they top deck Duo, we get majorly punished there, but that's a 1 out of 34 chance, so we're feeling fine about that. They're just going to attack into our set with the Mechanical Chaser. It's a Mystic Tomato. We'll bring out a Witch of the Black Forest. And main 2, they're just going to set 1, pass back to us. That's perfect. We've got a Raigeki, so we can deal with that board. And let's just hope that it's not a Recruiter that they just set. It was a Magician of Faith, so that's very, very powerful there. We'll attack in for 1100 and hope that that's enough. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. We feel very good about this. We can bring out Mechanical Chaser here and try and push the aggressive. If they've got a Mirror Force, then, you know, that's unfortunate. We lose both our monsters. But we do get a Search off the Witch, so I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. We're going to try attacking in for 2950. Unfortunately, they do have the Mirror Force, but we will get that Search that I mentioned. So we're just going to grab another Witch. And we'll pass back to them. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. And we draw a Sandgame, which is pretty nice. We're just going to bring out the Witch, and we're going to attack into their set to see what it is. It is unfortunately a Shining Angel, so they will be able to get out another light monster from their deck. They're going to get out Banisher of the Light, which is a very interesting monster that I haven't shown off too much on the channel yet, but I do think has some major potential in this format, and people have been experimenting with it quite a bit. So let's see what Colgate's build does with it. They're going to bring it out. We can't attack over it, so we just have to pass back to them, which is quite unfortunate, as they'll be able to bring it into defense here. They're going to bring out a Shining Angel, and that will get banished off of the Trap Hole that we have. So luckily, you know, they won't be able to get a monster out of that if we attack over it. Unfortunately, we don't have the means to do that. So we'll just set a Trap Hole, set a Sandgame, pass back to them. Now, I make this play because if they've got a Fisher, then we want to still have a monster on field to chump block. But maybe I should have set the Wall of Illusion instead, considering that. And also, if they've got a Raigeki here, then, you know, the Wall of Illusion would have been a much better loss than a Sandgame. But we do have the Magic Jammer if they do have Raigeki, so that's not the worst thing in the world. They are indeed going to Raigeki. We're going to think about this a bit. We are going to Magic Jammer here. So we'll discard the Wall of Illusion, as we've got 2 Recruiters on field, so we don't quite need it, until they flip up a Solemn Judgment of their own. So they will pay half their life points, but now we've got no monsters. We do have a Snatch Steal in hand, which is effectively a monster, but when they've got a 2k defender like that Banisher, it won't really make a difference here. They're going to activate Monster Reborn, bring back the Mechanical Chaser, and we both forget that Monster Reborn is banished after this, but hopefully that won't come up later in the game, or hopefully it won't matter too much. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw Magic Jammer, which isn't quite good here. We'll just set it, pass back to them. They're going to Mystical Space Typhoon. Both of our cards should get banished here. Again, we forget about that, but hopefully it won't matter too much in the end of the game. They're going to attack in for 1850 here with a Mechanical Chaser. Pass back to us. We draw a Fissure, which is very good. We'll activate the Fissure. That will indeed go to the graveyard because the Banisher will be destroyed by its effect. And then we can activate Snatch Steal to attack in here for 1850. We'll pass back to them, and they will gain 1,000 here. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Mystic Tomato, which is very nice. If we can get over that set, then we feel pretty good about this. Unfortunately, we can't. It's just another Banisher. So they'll pass back to us. They're going to set two, pass back to us. And they will gain 1,000 here from the Snatch Steal. We draw Dark Hole, which we could use now, but honestly, we don't feel the need to, as that would clear away our entire monster lineup, which isn't the best for us. So we'll just pass back to them. They're going to gain 1,000, pass back to us. We draw Mirror Force, which isn't the best here, and we don't necessarily want to set it in case they've got like a heavy storm. So we're just going to pass back to them. Unfortunately, they've got a duo, so they will be able to discard our entire hand, so we will lose two very powerful cards. Hopefully that won't come up at the end of the game. We're going to try Trap Holing that Mechanical Chaser they bring out. And they do have a Solemn Judgment here, so they will drop down to 2,300, but that Mechanical Chaser will stick. They're going to attack into our Mystic Tomato, so we will lose 450. We won't get a monster out to replace it. And they'll pass back to us. We draw a Reborn, which is pretty nice here, but not really useful right now. We'll attack into their Mechanical Chaser. They'll all get banished. And given that they haven't used up that much spell and trap removal, just Mystical Space Typhoon and a Heavy Storm, we're going to keep the Monster Reborn in hand. They've used up a duo, so, they've only got 2 hand-drip spells left in the deck, and they probably got more spell and trap removal left. So I feel like this is the safer play. But unfortunately, they bring out a White Magical Hat, which we should have thought of because they are playing Shining Angels, so it would make sense that they're playing a White Magical Hat as well. But they'll be able to attack in here and get rid of that Monster Reborn. So they'll pass back to us. We draw a Wall, which we can set, which is pretty nice, and they'll draw one. They'll attack into the wall, so that will deal them 850, which is pretty nice. Bounce the White Magical Hat back to hand. So he's just going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Mechanical Chaser, which is okay on this board. We can attack over their set potentially, but it doesn't really deal with the Banisher, unfortunately. We are just going to try attacking over the set. It is a Magician of Faith. So they're going to think about what to get here, and they're going to get back the Monster Reborn. Again, we didn't see that the Monster Reborn would have been banished. So this is, an illegal play technically, but it's accepted game state. Neither of us saw it, so it's perfectly fine. And even if they hadn't been able to get back the Reborn, they could have gotten back a Change of Heart, which could have been just as powerful. So we're going to pass back to them, and they're going to activate the Reborn, bring back a Mechanical Chaser here, and they're just going to crash into our Mechanical Chaser. So both of those will get banished. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Cannon Soldier, which is very nice. Actually, the Cannon Soldier may have made that Magician of Faith play actually end up mattering, as we would have still potentially had the Mechanical Chaser online for our Cannon Soldier, and that would have been 1,500 damage. But that was a Solemn Judgment, so they could have just solemned the Cannon Soldier. So it wouldn't have actually mattered in the end there. They're going to set another, pass back to us. We draw a Mystical Space Typhoon, which is fine. We are going to set that, pass back to them. We don't really have anything to do here, so they're just going to set one, pass back to us. We draw Robin Goblin, which is a bit of a brick right now, as we don't really have any way to take advantage of it. So we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to pass back to us. We draw Confiscation, which we don't really want to use right now, as we are at very low life points, and it seems like they don't really have any powerful cards in hand to use right now. So we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to activate Pot of Greed here, draw 2. That likely will get them something that they can use here. They're going to Dark Hole the board away. And everything will go to grave here because Dark Hole destroys Banisher at the same time. So that's fine. They're going to bring out a Witch of the Black Forest and attack in for 11 here. So they'll drop us down to 6. We don't really have any way to deal with that. They're going to set one. We are just going to Mystical Space Typhoon that in the end phase. And they're going to think about that and actually Magic Jammer the Mystical Space Typhoon. So that must be a pretty important set there. We draw a Fissure, and unfortunately that won't quite do it, as if we Fissure the Witch, they'll just get another monster to hand. So that will just be the end of the game there. Maybe if we had noticed that, the Reborn got banished, it would have turned out differently for us there. But honestly, I think that we were in a pretty losing position at that point. So I think it's fine. I think we would have lost either way, especially when drawing a Robin Goblin that was just dead, you know? And that's a big flaw with some of these cards, is that if you draw them and you just don't have the board set up to take advantage of them, they can be major bricks. And in a deck like this, it can't necessarily afford to have too many bricks. So we did lose game 1. Game 2, I think we might bring in things like Man-Eater Bugs to deal with the Shining Angels and the Banishers, but I don't quite remember, so we'll have to just wait and see. So we're going to go into game 2, and let's hope it goes a little bit better for us. So we are going to go first here, and we draw the duo again in the opener, which is very nice. So we will be able to activate that, pay our 1,000, and discard 2. We hit a Solemn Judgment, which is pretty good. They're going to discard a Lodgin as well, which means they likely have some other monsters in hand as well. We're just going to set our entire hand and pass back to them. If they've got a heavy, we do have a Solemn for that. If they've got 2 heavies, then that's really unfortunate. But we just got to hope that they don't have 2 heavies here. They're going to Pot of Greed, draw 2. That's fine by us. They're going to set 1 and then set 2, pass back to us. We do have 2 Mystical Space Typhoon for those 2 back rows, so we're just going to use them up right now. And that feels very good. We draw Change of Heart, and we could potentially use it on their set, but we don't feel like wasting it now. You know, if it's Faith, that would be a really good Change of Heart, but if it's not, then it feels like kind of a waste. So we're just going to attack into it with the Mystic Tomato here, and it is unfortunately Magician of Faith, so they will be able to get back a Pot of Greed. Quite unfortunate. We're going to set the Change of Heart, as we're mainly just playing around the hand rips at this point, so we're just going to pass back to them. And they're going to Pot of Greed, which is not a surprise as they got it back off the Faith. They're going to think about this for a bit, set 1, pass back to us. And I think this time we actually are going to Change of Heart just to use it up. And unfortunately, it's not a Magician this time, but we will be able to get in for 2,800 points of damage. In addition, we'll be able to set a Magician of Faith of our own to get back that Change of Heart later, which is very nice. They're going to Heavy Storm here, and we could potentially Solemn to keep the Mirror Force online. But I figure that they're probably heavying because they've got something else good, like a Raigeki or something. And so if we Solemn, dropping ourselves down to 3,500, we put ourselves in a very vulnerable position after this. So I think I'm fine letting the Mirror Force go. They're just going to set 1, switch the Shining Angel's defense, pass back to us. So I think we may have been fine there, just Solemning the heavy, but, you know, I think it's fine that we didn't. We've got some very powerful cards as well. We're going to think about what to do here, and we actually are going to flip up the Magician of Faith, targeting that Change of Heart, because if their set card is a Magician of Faith, it would be very nice to deprive them of that. And if it's not, and it's something like Banisher instead, we actually have an option for a lot of value here. And you'll see what I mean in a second. We're going to Change of Heart that set. It is indeed Banisher, and we're going to bring out White Magical Hat. And this is going to be a pretty good play on our part. We're going to attack over the Shining Angel with the Mystic Tomato to banish it with the Banisher's effect and prevent them from replacing itself. And then we're going to attack in with everything. You know, the Banisher and the Magician don't do much here, but the White Magical Hat attack will be able to discard a card from their hand. Let's see what we hit. We hit a Forceful Sentry, which we've been playing around the entire time, so I think that's perfectly fine. That will get banished, in fact, and end phase will pass back to them. They're going to bring out a White Magical Hat of their own, which, you know, will be able to clear the Magician of Faith here, but ultimately won't do much as we don't have any cards in hand. So they're going to pass back to us. We draw Magician of Faith, and we're just going to attack over the White Magical Hat, set a Magician of Faith, and potentially prepare for another Change of Heart play next turn. They're going to set 1, pass back to us. We draw Fisher, which is pretty good, and can potentially just have us wrap up the game here. Now, we do make a slight misplay in what's coming up here. We grab the Change of Heart first, and then we activate the Change of Heart right away, targeting their set, forgetting that Change of Heart will get banished off of the Banisher. I think we should have just activated Fisher first to clear the Banisher, so that way we would get the Change of Heart engraved in case it's a Magician of Faith to get back Change of Heart. But unfortunately, we don't see that, and neither does our opponent, to be fair. So we flip up the Magician of Faith, and this is actually an illegal play, just like in the first game, getting back the Change of Heart because it would be banished off of the Banisher. Luckily, it's a very sort of repairable game state. We would be able to basically pull off the same play, even if the Change of Heart had gotten banished, because we would have just activated Fisher to clear the Banisher, then flipped up the Magician of Faith, gotten back the Fisher into hand. So it would have been a very simple fix there, and it still would have been pretty much as effective. So we attack in with everything, and they will discard a card from hand. Let's see what they hit. They will discard a Sandgam, which is pretty good. So that's very nice on our part. They're going to get back the Magician of Faith, and we realized the mistake in the end phase because the watcher of the game sort of pointed that out to us. So I banish the change, and then I'll just take the Fisher instead because, as I outlined, there's a way to do this play here. They're just going to switch the Magician of Faith back to defense, pass back to us. We draw a Mechanical Chaser. We'll bring that out. We'll attack into their set with our Mystic Tomato. That's a Banisher, so, it's fine. We'll take 6, but we've got the Fisher for it next turn, and we will indeed just fire the Fisher here. Switch the Magician to defense, pass back to them, and it looks like that's the end of the game. So, I think that game we did win, but it does show some of the flaws of White Magical Hat. Our opponent managed to bring it out when we had no cards in hand, and it didn't get any value from that, and it was just sort of a weak monster. And, we managed to snipe 2 cards out of our opponent's hand, but I don't actually think those snipes were that useful. We hit a Forceful, which we were playing around anyways, and we also did a Sandgame, which if they had set the Sandgame there, we would have just won the game. So I don't think that the discards off the White Magical Hat mattered. I think the duo in the beginning may have mattered a bit more, but the White Magical Hat discards didn't really add much. This could have easily been a different story, though, if they had different cards in hand, so it was still nice depriving them of cards. But I think, in general, the extra discards are not really as needed. But going into Game 3, I think that we did actually side in some Man-Eater Bugs here to deal with the Shining Angels and the Banishers. So let's see how that goes for us. We are going to go second here, as we did win Game 2. And let's see what happens. They're going to... they misclick there, so they seem to maybe set, but they don't actually. And they activate a Forceful Sentry, so they will get to see our entire hand and choose something to spin back. They're going to spin back a Solemn Judgment, which makes sense as it's the hardest card in our hand to play around. So the Solemn will go back to the deck. They're going to set 2, pass back to us. We draw a Witch, so we're just going to set that as they don't know about it. And then we're going to set a Speller Trap card here. And they will be able to snipe that with the Mystical Space Typhoon, revealing that it is indeed a Mirror Force. So they're going to flip up the Witch and just attack into our set, because if any of the cards that they saw in our hand initially, then this is a very good play for them. Unfortunately for them, it is the Witch, so they won't be able to get over that. They're just going to set 1, set another, pass back to us. We draw a Trap Hole, which is pretty nice. We're going to set the Trap Hole, set a Man-Eater Bug, and pass back to them. They're going to flip up the Magician of Faith, so they will be able to get a card here. They're going to grab the Forceful Sentry, and they are going to Forceful Sentry our hand to see what we've got. This does let them know that we've got a Man-Eater Bug set there, so, they'll be able to play around that a little bit. And they'll also be able to take that White Magical Hat back to deck. We don't have any spells engraved, so I think that makes sense. And they're going to attack into the Man-Eater Bug with the Witch. We will be able to pop the Magician of Faith there. Not the best pop, but it still is a pop. And we didn't want to pop the Witch, as that would get them more advantage here. So they're just going to think about this, and they're just going to pass back to us. We're just going to pass back to them, as neither of the cards in our hand are good to set. And if they do clear the Witch, then we're fine with that. We get a search. They're going to bring out a Mechanical Chaser. We are going to Trap Hole that. They're going to switch the Witch to defense, pass back to us. We draw a Sandgan. We're just going to set that. They don't have Banisher online now, although it is a bit of a risk, as they could summon out Banisher, activate Raigeki, and we get majorly punished. But I don't really think they're incentivized to do that right now. They're going to set 1, pass back to us, and we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to think about this a bit, and they're just going to pass back to us. We're just sort of in the grind game now. Neither of us really has the ability to press the offensive here, and so we're just walling up. We're going to set a Man-Eater Bug, pass back to them. They're going to set 1, set another, pass back to us. We draw a Fisher, so we could potentially get aggressive here, fissuring the Witch and then Man-Eater Bug popping one of their sets, and then summoning out White Magical Hat to attack in. I think that's a bit greedy, though. We will flip up the Man-Eater Bug to target their new set, just in case it's a Magician of Faith. It isn't, it's just a Shining Angel. So we'll set the Fisher, set another Man-Eater Bug, and pass back to them. They're going to bring out a Shining Angel, and that will enable them to attack into our Man-Eater Bug. Quite unfortunate, but they're just going to pass to us. We draw a Confiscation, which we're not really going to use yet. We could use it. We could also pop the Witch and flip up the Bug, pop the Shining Angel, try and get in for some damage and Confiscation afterwards. But, I really don't really feel the need to do that. And if their set is a Banisher, we could get majorly punished. So we don't really want to go that route. They're going to switch the Shining Angel back to defense. We draw a Solemn, which is very nice. So we're just going to set that pass back to them. And they're just going to pass back to us. We draw Trap Hole, which is a bit too little too late, but we're going to set it for later. And they're going to pass back to us. We're just passing back and forth at this point. And we're going to activate the Forceful Sentry here to just try and get hand knowledge and see what they've got. We've got the Confiscation for later once we pop the Witch, but this should be good here. They disconnect briefly. Dueling Book does have its issues. They're going to think about what to do on that Forceful, and they are actually going to Magic Jammer. That makes sense. This way, they at least get to choose what goes out of their hand, and we won't get hand knowledge. So we're going to pass back to them. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We draw a Robin Goblin, which could be good for later, so we'll set that, pass back to them. And they're going to pass back to us. We draw a Fisher, which is very nice. We can actually get super aggressive here with the Robin Goblin, which would be pretty good. We're going to Fisher, which does clear the Witch there. They will get a search off of this, but that's ultimately fine. They're going to declare the Witch effect, and they're going to grab a Mechanical Chaser. We are going to activate Confiscation just to see what they've got. They're going to think about this, and they will let that go through, so we'll get to see their entire hand here. I think maybe this would have been a mistake. Maybe we should have saved it for after we flipped up the Man-Eater Bug and popped whatever they had set, just in case it was a Recruiter. But, we've got the Robin Goblin plus a White Magical Hat for later if we make a big push here, and this does give us a better idea of what they may have on field. And I am glad that we do this because we do get to see that they do have a Mirror Force in hand, so we don't really have to play around that. They've also got two Banisher, and a Mechanical Chaser and a Shining Angel. Now our Trap Hole can deal with the Shining Angel and Mechanical Chaser. We can't really deal with the Banisher easily, but if we set one off Confiscation, they just set the other, so there's no real point to doing that. Wuboku just buys them one turn and doesn't really deprive us of cards on field, so we're fine with that. I think the pick here is Mirror Force, so we are indeed going to go for the Mirror Force, and that will get discarded. And we're just going to go and pop the set with a Man-Eater Bug. We're going to Fisher away that Shining Angel. Unfortunately, they do have Magic Jammer for this. So we could potentially Solemn Judgment this just to get a major push in. But I don't think we quite need to. Oh, I guess we are going to do that. Yeah. But they've got a Solemn of their own. Again, I don't really think we needed to Solemn Judgment there, as we do have the Magician of Faith to get back the Fisher next turn. So I think we could have saved it for a turn, but we are just going to set the Magician of Faith and pass back to them. They're going to attack into our Man-Eater with the Shining Angel, so we will take 950 here, and they are going to Mystical Space Typhoon our Trap Hole in main phase 2. Very glad that they Mystical Space Typhoon the Trap Hole instead of saving it for the Robin Goblin, as that would have been pretty bad for us if they had sniped the Robin Goblin. They're going to set one, pass back to us. We have the pretty strong read that that's a Banisher, so we're not going to go super aggressive here, although I guess we could. We're just going to bring out the Mechanical Chaser here, attack into that Shining Angel, and on attack declaration, we are going to activate the Robin Goblin to potentially snipe a card out of their hand. This will cause them to use the Wuboku, which is very nice for us, because we still will be able to clear the Shining Angel here. We'll grab back a Fisher to hand, Fisher away the Shining Angel, and pass back to them. Maybe this wasn't the best play, maybe we should have saved the Fisher for like a Banisher, but we know that they've got another Banisher in hand, so it's not the best for us. We're just going to draw a Mystic Tomato, switch the Magician to defense. We could attack into one of their sets and clear it, but it's honestly not the best for us, as we know that they've got two Banishers, so it's very likely a Banisher there. So we're just going to pass back to them. They're going to set another, pass back to us. We draw a Solemn Judgment, so we're just going to set that, pass back to them. Again, we have no real need to get aggressive here, as we know that we can't get through their defenses. We're just hoping that we can draw something like a Raigeki, and unfortunately that's not that. If they draw a Raigeki of their own, then that's pretty bad for us. So we just got to hope that they don't draw a Raigeki of their own. Although we do have the Solemn to prevent that, I guess. They are just going to pass back to us. And we do draw a Raigeki here, so we will be able to go for potentially lethal. We're going to Raigeki their board away. They will get a search off of that Sangan there. But ultimately, that's fine, as we do just have lethal on board. We're going to summon out White Magical Hat just, to rub it in. And that will be the end of the game. So, we did manage to win the match there, which was pretty nice. It seemed pretty touch and go there for a bit, but we were able to outgrind our opponent in Game 3, and we were able to just press the offensive in game 2, and pull out a win. So do I still think the deck is bad even though that it managed to win? Yes. I really don't think that the Robin Goblin and the White Magical Hat add anything to this deck in general. Like you saw in game 2, we did manage to get 2 discards off the White Magical Hat, but they didn't really affect things too much in the end. And you saw in this game that Robin Goblin was useful for getting rid of a Wuboku, but if our opponent had just saved the Mystical Space Typhoon for it, or just guessed correctly with their Mystical Space Typhoon and sniped the Robin Goblin, then it would be a lot worse here. We also had the Solemn Judgment for the Wuboku, even if we didn't have the Robin Goblin, so we would have still been fine here. I think overall, these hand control aspects of the deck don't really add stuff to the good stuff deck in general, and honestly just dilute it and make it a little bit worse. Generally, the 3 handrips spells and Magicians of Faith are all you'll need if you're trying to get cards out of your opponent's hand, and they work very effectively. You don't need all this Robin Goblin, White Magical Hat stuff in addition. That being said, I don't think the deck is like Rogue or below. I think it's probably firmly in tier 2 because it is basically just a watered down good stuff deck. But you know, I think it just raises the question like, why would you play this when you could just play good stuff instead? And it also raises the question that I mentioned in the title of this video. How much hand control is too much hand control? You know, hand control can be very strong, but I don't really think it actually adds anything once you've actually pulled off your hand spells a couple of times. But, you know, it is a question that people can have various opinions on, so I want to know your opinions down in the comments below. Let me know what you think of this deck. Do you think it's actually better than I'm making it out to be? Or do you think it's actually a lot worse than I'm making it out to be? Do you think it's not even tier 2, but like Rogue or below? Let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.